Good morning. It's good to be back. I'm waiting for Facebook to get rolling here. Looks like we're going. I'm back from a visit to the great state of Idaho and saw many of my wife's relatives while we were there. So that was great. We did go for a funeral, so that is not always fun, but she lived a good life and apparently was a believer, so that's good. Well, many years ago, one of our kids was involved in a soccer team, and it came up that the team had an opportunity to play in a league that they hadn't played in before. But the problem was that many of the games were going to be on Sunday. And so the parents had discussions. It was a good opportunity for the kids, but it was going to be on almost every Sunday. And generally, the parents were not opposed to a few games on Sunday, but since it was almost every Sunday, we decided not to participate in that league. And the reason being that church was important to all of us, and we didn't want to let soccer games interfere with going to church. And it also would have sent the wrong message to our kids, that message being that church wasn't really all that important. Uh, and we also thought it was important to have at least one day out of the week of rest, a Sabbath, even though we were doing that on Sunday, the first day of the week. Now, the Sabbath was a big deal for the Jews in the law of Moses, in the Ten Commandments, even. Keeping the Sabbath was the fourth commandment. And it says in Exodus 20:8-11, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. And so the principle of the Sabbath goes all the way back to creation, and God included it here in the Ten Commandments. Uh, and also, the Israelites had just spent hundreds of years working as slaves, and they were forced to work 7 days a week. And so, having a Sabbath day of rest would be a real blessing for them. And it could be that some of them needed God to command as Sabbath rest, so they would actually do it. In today's passage, Luke 6:1-11, we have two incidents where Jesus does something on the Sabbath that the scribes and the Pharisees believed was not allowed. And over time, the religious leadership had layered rule upon rule, to the point where the Sabbath had lost its true meaning. And so, in that respect, Jesus was correcting a wrong view of the Sabbath. So, for example, they had defined a Sabbath day walk, how far someone could walk on the Sabbath. And it was 2,000 cubits, which was about 3,000 feet. And this had something to do with how far the Ark of the Covenant was from the people's tents during the time of Joshua. And since the people walked from their tents to worship on the Sabbath, well, that must be okay. You couldn't light a fire on the Sabbath. You couldn't cook or clean on the Sabbath. And even today, there's Sabbath observances. There's elevators in buildings that have a Sabbath mode. And so the elevator will stop at every floor. And that way, the people don't have to work on the Sabbath by pushing the button for their floor on the elevator. The International Bible Encyclopedia says it was during the period between Ezra, after they came back from exile in Babylon, between Ezra and the Christian era, that the spirit of Jewish legalism flourished. And so innumerable restrictions and rules were formulated for the conduct of life under the law. And great principles were lost to sight in the name of petty details. Now, Christians, we accept the other 9 commandments, and I think tend to accept the Sabbath as a principle, but we usually worship on Sunday, the first day of the week, and that's because Jesus was raised from the grave on Sunday, and the early church began worshiping on Sundays. But I've known many Christians who do not operate their business on Sundays. Some of my ancestors, Amish Mennonites, they also had pretty strict rules about working on Sunday, which they considered the Sabbath. When I worked out on the tree farm, we typically would not work on Sunday unless there was an important load of trees that had to go out. And then we would get volunteers to come in and we would go load the truck and get it done because it had to be done. So it'll be good to pay attention to what Jesus says about the Sabbath in this passage and others. But generally, I think we have the opposite problem. We almost let anything interfere with going to church on Sundays and worshiping God with our church family. But this is Luke 6, 1 to 11, and so I might as well read the whole thing here. Luke 6, 1 to 11. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful to do on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" He looked around at them all and then said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and the hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. I have people in my building today. Well, first of all, a confrontation between Jesus and the Pharisees is set up when Jesus does something that breaks their Sabbath rules. And he does that in verse 1. On a Sabbath, he and his disciples are going through a grain field, and the disciples began to pick the heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and then eat the kernels. And so Jesus and his disciples were working on the Sabbath. And this, I think, would be considered by most people at the time to be breaking the Sabbath, because all of the rules that surrounded observing the Sabbath. But we see that Jesus' disciples had freedom to work on the Sabbath when there was a need, and we'll see why in a few verses. But first, the Pharisees object. And so in verse 2, some of the Pharisees say, "Well, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" And we see this even today, because legalists will confront God's people, other Christians, when they're doing things that are thought to be impermissible in the mind of the legalist. Some people are required to work on Sundays. Excuse me. and therefore they will have to miss church and so on. And this will be judged by some people. But we could go look beyond observing the Sabbath. Drinking alcohol is considered verboten by some, even though the Bible doesn't forbid it. When I first started at Dallas Seminary, students weren't permitted to drink alcohol ever, except in extraordinary circumstances. And there were a few professors who took note that the Bible didn't say this, and that they thought it basically was being legalism. Was legalism. And by the time I graduated, drinking alcohol was not allowed on campus or at school events, but people were free to decide for themselves what they wanted to do. When I was young, going to movies was considered questionable by my church. It was considered not allowed. At my high school, a Christian school, we didn't have dances because dancing wasn't permitted. And of course, when you look at something and say, well, the Bible doesn't forbid that, then some of us will go too far in doing it. And Paul writes somewhere that the sin is in the excess. And so something may be fine in itself, but if you overdo it, then it can become a sin. There's also the opposite danger of thinking that nothing should be forbidden when the Bible does, in fact, say that some things are wrong. So we need to be prepared to be confronted by legalists if we do something that they consider impermissible. But we should make sure we are on solid ground when it comes to what we are doing. Well, Jesus, he reaches back to the Old Testament for an explanation of why it was okay for his disciples to do what they were doing. And so verses 3 and 4 say, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate it, or he ate what is lawful only for the priest to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. And so Jesus compares himself to David, who was in need and did something that was not permitted. And this story is from 1 Samuel 21, 1-9, where David is on the run from Saul, and he stops by the tabernacle, which was at Nob, and he asks the priest if the priest has any food. And the priest says, well, all I got is the consecrated bread. And this is the bread that was placed on the table in the holy place. And then it was changed out once a week, and the priest could eat the bread that was taken off of the table. But only the priests were permitted to eat it. Well, but David and his men ate the bread, and so this puts the Pharisees kind of on the horns of a dilemma. Nothing in the story of 1 Samuel 21 suggests that it was improper for David and his men to eat the bread, even though only the priests were supposed to eat it. And it's because they were hungry and they were in need of food. And so their need outweighed the rule that only the priests could eat the consecrated bread. So if the Pharisees said their rule, if they stuck with their rule, that would mean that David had acted contrary to the law. And since David was considered great, that would have been very bad. But if they agreed that what David had done was okay, then what Jesus and his disciples had done would have been okay too, because their need outweighed the rule against working on the Sabbath. And so what Jesus is teaching is that someone's need can sometimes be more important than what is considered permitted under the law and tradition. And of course, you could take that a little too far if you were wanting to. Well, Jesus is greater than David, and therefore he's Lord of the Sabbath. And verse 5 says, then Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Now, that's quite a claim, as David was the representative of a new way, a new king chosen by God. Jesus is the representative of another new way that he himself is bringing to the world. And the new includes a different view of the Sabbath. As Lord of the Sabbath, Jesus has changed the role of the Sabbath in our lives. Uh, so that's one reason that we look at the Sabbath differently today, is because Jesus taught that in some circumstances, someone's need can outweigh observing the Sabbath. On the second incident in this passage, Jesus comes across a man who has a withered hand, and he confronts the Pharisees about what is acceptable to do on the Sabbath. And verse 6 says, on another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. Okay, verse 6. Well, like Jesus, when we are on mission, we may come across people who need help, and it may be on the Sabbath. And so, will we let our view of the Sabbath stop us from helping others? Is the Sabbath more important than people? And I would substitute Sunday in for the Sabbath there for us. So we can be on the lookout for people who need help as we are going about our life and mission. But people will watch what we are doing in order to find a reason to accuse us. And that's what the religious leaders do to Jesus in verse 7. It says that the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. I think it's not too likely these days that people will watch us to see what we're doing on the Sabbath or on Sunday. But the Pharisees and the others were looking for ways to do something about Jesus, and they were hoping he would break the Sabbath, and then they could use that against him. But if we're known to be Christians, if people out there know that we claim to be Christian, we should be aware that people may watch us in order to find something to accuse us about. And so we should try to make sure that it's not a legitimate accusation. I know quite a few people who don't want to do business with people who identify themselves as Christians, because that increases the odds that they're going to get ripped off. And that's a very sad thing. But it would be sort of comparable if it was people from my church watching me go into Mike's Place. Mike's Place is a tavern a couple of blocks away from my home, and I was there once years ago to play pool with my son and one of his friends. And now it's weirdly a hangout for kids in their 20s, and some of their parents go there too. So I find that kind of strange, but I haven't been there to see. Well, habitually hanging out at taverns and getting drunk is not a good thing. But we might be going into Mike's Place to work on a relationship, to play pool with our son and his friend. We might be going in there to help someone. And so it's okay to go into a tavern sometimes. Some pastors I know spent time in taverns because you can make a lot of good connections with people in a tavern. As Jesus said, you go where there's people who are sick. And if you want to find sick people, you might find them in a tavern, more likely than you would be to find them at a church. Well, Jesus, he has the advantage of knowing what people are thinking. And so he sometimes would help people as an example and as a way to confront other people's thoughts. And that's what verse 8 says. It says, but Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." So he got up and stood there. Well, that would be kind of fun, standing up in front of everyone with your shriveled hand. And there would be a lot of tension in the air as people waited to see what Jesus would do. We might experience people being helped or even healed as an example to confront other people's thoughts. For example, in John 9:3, there was a man who had been blind from birth. And Jesus' disciples asked whether it was the man or his parents who had sinned to make him blind, because that was the way people thought back then. If you had a problem, if you're blind or had a shriveled hand, it must be because you or someone else had sinned. But Jesus says, well, neither. He was born blind so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And that's a little bit of a troubling idea, that God would allow someone to be born blind so that many years later God could heal him through Jesus. But God sometimes arranges the circumstances of our lives to make a point, to show his power. And we would do well to pay attention to what's happening around us. Well, now that Jesus has the man with the shriveled hand standing up in front of everyone, he turns to the religious leaders to confront them. He wants to show that it's okay to do good and to save people on the Sabbath. And verses 9 and 10 say, then Jesus said to them, the religious leaders, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to destroy it?" He looked around at them all and then said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was completely restored. Well, that must have been quite an amazing thing for this man. He's lived with this shriveled hand, and then now it's healed. If Jesus had observed the Pharisees' rules about the Sabbath, he wouldn't have healed the guy, and the man's hand would have remained withered. And so this particular incident is probably easy for us. Of course, you would heal the guy. And the moral of the story is do good and save people, even if you're doing it on the Sabbath. But this incident was also an easy call for the Pharisees. And situations we find ourselves in will be an easy call for some people, other people as well. I'm getting vacuumed outside. Well, and those other people may be angry and plot how to harm us when we do things for Jesus that they don't approve of. And verse 11 says, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. And so the way Jesus treated the Sabbath was one of the reasons the Pharisees and others why they wanted to get rid of him. And another one is that he sometimes claimed to be God. At least those were the excuses they used. The real reasons also included that people began to follow Jesus, and the Pharisees and the priests were afraid that the Romans would crack down on them, and they would lose the good thing they had going. The Romans gave them a lot of freedom as long as the people didn't get out of hand. Well, it might be the same for us, though the things we do will be different, and the excuses others use to disapprove of us will be different too. But we've got to do things for Jesus, even though others may not approve, and even if they'll be angry at us for doing them. So these two incidents today tell us that Jesus thinks it's okay to do on the Sabbath. It's okay to meet legitimate needs, and it's okay to help other people, to save them. And since we are not Jews, we will have to extend the principles a little to other areas of our lives. It's okay to put some responsibilities on hold for a little bit to meet legitimate needs of our own and others and to help other people. We might be on our way to church and see somebody with a flat tire, and we stop and help them with their tire, even though it'll make us miss church, of course. Our situation with the soccer league was the opposite problem. Should we let something interfere with our Sundays? Is having the kids in a soccer league that plays on most Sundays important enough to miss church? And we decided that being able to go to church was more important. And I think all of us have thought that we made the right decision in that situation. So Jesus gives us the freedom to take care of needs and to help people and to do good on the Sabbath. And we don't observe the Sabbath on the Sabbath because the early church started worshiping on Sundays, the day that Jesus was raised from the dead. But we should observe a Sabbath rest one day a week out of 7, and we should worship God on Sundays or whatever day works for us. And remember, my one church meets on Saturdays because we rent space from another church. But we shouldn't become legalistic about what we can and can't do on Sundays. All right, well, let's have a word of prayer, and then we can sign off for the day. Join me in prayer. Father, thank you for the principle of the Sabbath, that we should take one day out of 7 to rest and to regain our strength. And it's better for us if we do take that time to rest. But help us not to be legalistic about it, and that we know that sometimes our needs or other people's needs may outweigh the need for rest, and that it's okay to help other people. It's okay to save people, even if it happens to be on the Sabbath. And give us wisdom to extend this to other areas of our lives where we can tend to become legalistic, or maybe we have the opposite problem and we become a little too free with what we think we can do. So give us wisdom to walk on the narrow path that Jesus laid out for us. Bless all who tune in and listen to this, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, well, thanks again for tuning in. Hope you have a good week, and hope to see you back next week. And we'll see you then. Bye-bye.